Well, welcome back. Thank you for coming back from the break. That's great. That's good news when you're always sitting back down again. I've got the privilege of being able to introduce Chris Bedford. And Chris and I got to know each other just a little while back when one of the local farmers, Karen Lubbers from Lubbers Farm, had said, if you're looking for a speaker, this guy is really good, and he's got this great documentary. And she put the documentary in the mail, and I had it the next day, and I watched it, and I got really excited about it, that not only is Chris Bedford right here in West Michigan, but the documentary was really cool, talking about the local foods, local markets, economics of agriculture, and it certainly seemed to fit with what we're talking about. So I've only known Chris a little while, but I really enjoyed his enthusiasm. And also, Chris is the co-founder of the Sweetwater Local Foods Market in Muskegon, and he's the president of the Center for Economic Security. He's an award-winning filmmaker and a nationally recognized advocate for the development of healthy, local food systems. He lives and works on an organic farm in Montague with his partner, Diana Jancic. He's going to talk about the economics of local food revolution, and it's interesting because Chris not only talks about it, he's done documentaries on it, but he lives on an organic farm, so he understands it from the ground up, literally from the ground up. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Chris Bedford and welcome him to our summit.
Thank you very much, Ken. I'm going to got a lot of your time this morning, so I'm not going to try to abuse it. There is a lot of fairly serious things I'm going to talk about, so I figured I ought to start with a joke and then go downhill from there. Farmer comes out of his farmhouse one morning, and he finds his favorite dog lying motionless in the farmyard. And he's really upset, and he calls the vet, and the vet comes out, and the farmer says, "Doc, just do something. He's my favorite dog. Will you do something to help him?" So the vet looks at him, and then he says, "John, do you have a cat?" And the farmer goes over and gets one of the farmyard cats, and he hands it to the vet. The vet stands right over the dog and drops the cat right on the dog. And the cat goes, "Meow," and then stops, sniffs one end of the dog, sniffs the other end of the dog, and walks away. And the vet turns to the farmer and says, "Well, I'm sorry, John. I'm afraid your dog is gone. There's nothing I can do for him." And the farmer says, "Well, I guess I sort of figured that, Doc. So what do I owe you?" And the vet says, $500. And the farmer goes, $500? Says, "Yeah, well, my farm visit fee is $35, but you know what CAT scans cost today." It's a veterinarian joke. I collect a lot of these things from working with farmers. And what this joke sort of starts is really about to change a frame. And I'm going to talk about how we look at ourselves and how we might look at ourselves and how that could change just about everything in our economic and personal and cultural lives. So let's see if this is working. Is it? It is. So we start, this is not the picture of the Earth from space when we landed on the moon and we had that great picture of the Earthrise. But we, for a long time, for about, I would say, maybe 35 years, we've been thinking globally, that the global sort of conversation has dominated how we think about things. Trade, we talk about pandemics globally, we talk about global warming, we talk about global extinction of species, we talk about all different kinds of global war for a while. But that's changing now. And we are now beginning to refocus on our country, and that's a whole conversation, and all of you could contribute to it about why suddenly, even though we're the last superpower in the world, the only superpower in the world, suddenly what's happening to us in our country is becoming a much bigger deal in our political and public conversation. And I'm not going to talk about that, but this is to say that we are beginning to focus inward on ourselves. And actually, we're going another step than that. We're beginning to actually focus in our bioregion. Now, we are in the Great Lakes sort of bioregion, and that's an ecologically integrated area. If you look at Chicago in this map behind me, basically that's a map of Chicago's food shed. Chicago draws food from 400-mile radius approximately. So if I was the mayor of Chicago, I'd be thinking about, how do I feed my city? That's what I'd be looking at. And one of the aspects of our bioregion is we have a lot of the world's fresh water. All of you know that. You know the kind of pressure we're under as a result of that. Lake Michigan, I was not aware when I started to prepare this talk. I didn't realize how much water was in Lake Michigan, but we have a lot of water in Lake Michigan, a lot of fresh water in Lake Michigan. And a lot of people want that water. That's a golf course outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, sitting in the middle of what has to be one of the harshest deserts in North America. And that's a quote from Bill Richardson during the campaign. He says, well, you've got too much water up here, and we need some of it down in the Southwest. And that's a political reality that we're going to face, that as the world's climate changes and as areas begin to get drier and drier, and how much drier? National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicts the Colorado River, which is the principal water source, for much of the Mountain West, its flow is going to be cut by 50%. That means a lot of the cities and the subdivisions and the gardens and the lawns are going to not be sustainable. Now, Bill Bobier, who's an organic farmer and a former state representative representing Ottawa County and parts of Newaygo, tells me that there's a 36-inch pipe at Chicago that was owned by Enron, and it's just there waiting to take our water. 36-inch pipe. So we are in the middle. So our bioregion has become a big deal suddenly, right? We're no longer just the Midwest. We are the Saudi Arabia of water. And that's going to change our politics. It's going to change our economics. It's going to change many things in our lives. So here is the area that the West Michigan Strategic Alliance covers. And this is an aerial map. What did we do before we had Google Maps? My God. This area is 8 counties, the West Michigan Strategic Alliance, and it is a region, and it's an example. The alliance is an example of regional planning and thinking that I think is the future. Now, you could argue how big the region should be, as Karen suggested. If you keep talking to your neighbors, they start joining you. But I think this is the West Michigan Strategic Alliance, its foundation and its mission is very far thinking, because this is where we're going to be. This is going to be the conversation that's going to be dominating our children's lives. What is in our region? What can we do sustainably here? Not depending on, we get 70% of our apple juice from China. We grow a lot of apples here. That apple juice comes by jet or by boat to us. That's not going to be in the future. So what do we have here? What does this region have? And one of the ways to think about this, and I've been debating with myself whether I should use this metaphor or not, because it's a fairly extreme metaphor. What if we were an island? What if these 8 counties were an island, and we had to depend on what we had in these 8 counties to survive? What would that be like? Now, we are not an island, and I'm still going to want to drink coffee from wherever, Ethiopia or wherever it comes from, and I'm still want to drink orange juice, which will come from someplace other than Michigan. But increasingly, we're going to have to turn and look to ourselves for the basic things we need to survive. I don't think that's a really radical idea. Yet, we are not talking about it much in any of the spheres of the public conversation. So I want to talk about food. And I'm going to talk about food and farmland. I'm not going to talk about restaurants. I'm not going to talk about, supermarkets. I want to talk about the production of food and what that means for us here in our island here, the West Michigan Strategic Alliance Island. Within that island, these are figures from 2002 agricultural census. The 2007 census figures have not been processed, but I don't think they're much different. They will be out soon. They keep saying soon. You never know when it's going to come out. We have about 1.5 million acres in farmland in these 8 counties. Michigan as a total has about 10.1 million acres. So we have a really strong farm base in these 8 counties. That's a lot of farmland. Of those 1.5 million, little under 1 million crops were grown on and food was harvested from. That crop might have been hay, it might have been corn, it might have been peaches or asparagus. Actually, it might have been many things, because one of the things about Michigan is that we grow 125 different crops in Michigan commercially. 120. The only state that does more is California. And in fact, if you look at our agriculture, we are the California of the Midwest. We have an extraordinarily large agricultural potential here, which in some ways is not being tapped. That's 65%. The balance of the farmland is either fallow or it's being used to graze animals on. Now, in 2002, again, these numbers are so out of date, but we don't have the new census numbers yet. But I think they're about the same. We sold about $568 million in crop sales, things that we grew, plants. Now, that's for these 8 counties. We had about almost an equal, a little slightly less, about $100 million less livestock product sales, for a total of $1,031 million in agricultural sales. That's a big deal for 8 counties. That's a lot of money. Our population for the 8 counties, and this is the latest figures I could get, is just about 1.4 million. Now, that population spends a little over $3 billion a year on food. Now, we don't really have an accurate number county by county. This is a per capita number that the USDA comes up with, and I just multiplied it times the population, so it could be more, it could be less, but it's approximately that. Of that amount, we spend $2 billion in food for home and $1.1 billion eating out. Again, we don't really have a hard number for the 8 counties for that, but that's, again, the ratio that characterizes Michigan as a whole, and so I just applied it to this $3.1 billion. Now, of those $2 billion that we spent on home purchases, again, we don't know this number. This is an estimate, but it's about 1% to 2% comes from these 8 counties. So we have $1 billion agricultural business, and we only spend $20 to $40 million to feed ourselves from that agricultural base. In Michigan, if you look at Michigan as a whole, it probably goes to about 4 to 5% that we buy from. But it's nowhere close to half or 3/4. It's 5%. We are not feeding ourselves. We are importing 95% of our food. That's incredible. I used to live in Iowa, and the Secretary of Agriculture there, who's now the Lieutenant Governor, gave a speech once, and she's a very conservative person, and she started her speech out, if we built a wall around Iowa, probably the richest piece of farmland in the United States, we would starve, because 92% of the land grows corn and soybeans, not for human consumption. Now think about that. The richest farmland, and they don't They don't feed themselves. They don't even come close to feeding us. Well, that's true for us too. So, that means that we are at risk. If the price of oil continues to go up, and we'll talk a little bit more about oil, if the international situation continues to disintegrate and that we aren't going to be able to count on supplies as competition from India and China begins to take away what used to be our supplies, we're going to have to do something different. The good news is we can, because we really are sitting on not only a pot of water gold, but of farming gold here. We have skilled farmers, we have good soil in many places, and we have the ability, if we decide to do it, to feed ourselves. Well, what would that mean? That's called, by the way, the local food revolution. Now, what's motivating this is if you all have been paying attention this week to the melamine in milk in China scandal, which has been going on actually for 2 years, and the Chinese government is pretending like it doesn't. They put melamine into milk to boost up its apparent protein content so they get a better price per hundredweight. And melamine is a plastic that it's not good for humans to eat. That's cowboy capitalism with no rules. Well, we run a farmer's market. We have about 1,000 regular customers. People are paying attention to this. They come up and talk to us every Saturday about this. Do you hear the lightest thing? People are nervous about where their food is coming from and what's in their food. I mean, the story in NPR this morning was that the Chinese dairy industry may be doomed because the people who buy Chinese dairy products are Japan and Singapore and Thailand. Those places are closely around China. They're not going to buy them anymore. So this local food revolution has got some interesting impetus from this global situation. There's also this sort of local food as a cultural value. August 29th through, I think, September 1st in San Francisco, they had the first meeting, sort of big celebration of Slow Food Nation. And that's a picture of the City Hall in San Francisco. They've ripped up the formal gardens and planted a vegetable garden as a symbol in San Francisco. And it's a very big deal. There was a lot of people. It's very high-end. We have the Potawatomi slow food group here, or Convivium in Grand Rapids, and there's a lot of activity around it. But it's really about the discovery of the pleasures of local food. So it's no longer just that negative stuff about we can't trust the food, we don't know where it comes from. It's also when we have food, we know where it comes from. We can enjoy those pleasures, because part of it is one of the things that Wendell Berry says food with a story always tastes better. And if we know the story of our food, that it came from Karen Lubber's farm, Lubber's family farm, which is just right over here, and we know Karen and her family, that food has a story, and it does taste better. It actually tastes better, but it also tastes better because we're connected to it. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. The sort of Eat Local Food Challenge has come out of Local First, which is, all of you may know, is a campaign to have local businesses support local businesses in Grand Rapids area. Our market is part of this revolution because our market is all local. I mean, it's not local. It's the olive oil and the coffee we sell. Everything else is local. And there is a brand new organization, West Michigan Food Cooperative, which is, now I think got over 300 families that buy food regularly from local farmers through an internet arrangement where they can buy by going online and ordering, and once a month pick up the food in downtown Grand Rapids. So there's a lot of things going on with this local food revolution. So I want to talk about what does it really mean and what is its promise for us. We have these beginnings, these sort of first steps. But what the local food revolution represents isn't just another branding of the Oldsmobile or whatever. It's something fundamental. It's a revolution. And so what does that mean? And what does that mean in a positive way as an opportunity for us? Now, local, I'm going to sort of go through sort of deconstructing the term just a little bit here. I could go very long on this, but this is, you'd all be asleep. Local, in its coarsest sense, means not long distance. The average meal, according to 1980 figures, and I think the figures have not been updated for over 25 years, is the average Michigan meal travels 2,000 miles. All those miles are fueled by oil. So if it costs 4 times as much to transport a tomato from California as to buy it, which it does today, that local tomato suddenly is very competitive because that price of oil is extraordinary. It's just changing the food system. And there's a lot more about that I could talk about, but I want to go through this whole thing. Local is also about our identity. The slow food the slow food movement is about food that has a place associated with it. And this is a quote from Carlos Petrini, who's the founder of the slow food movement in Italy. Each nation has its own identity with regard to food culture. Each village has its own particular foods and recipes. And I would add to that, each family has got its own food traditions. If you went and just sat with your brothers and sisters or your aunts and uncles, your grandparents and your parents, I bet you could arrive at some recipes and some traditions. Every family has them. Unfortunately, many of them today is like, every Friday we go to Pizza Hut, but that's a separate tradition. We will talk about that one. So local is about having identity, about being rooted in a place, about knowing who you are. And this is the really important one. Local is about being native to a place. This is language that comes from Bill McDonough from Charlottesville, an architect and a revolutionary thinker about this stuff. Food is tied to a place. Vandana Shiva says in India, there are 200,000 different kinds of rice because they've grown rice for so long there that rice is adapted to each place it's grown and it's become different because it's life. It's a dynamic relationship between the soil and the water and the sun and the plant. They've adapted. So that incredible diversity, which we wiped out, by the way, with a deal. We tried to wipe it out that Bill Clinton put through, where they're going to import U.S. rice, which is monoculture rice as opposed to diversity. It's like a fundamental attack on biodiversity and our food system, which may be very important. Because if the dominant strain of rice is attacked by a blight and destroyed, and we don't have any other genetically different ones, what are we going to turn to? We need the diversity just to protect ourselves. So there's a way to think about this local being native to a place, local food being a native ecology. We always talk about survival of the fittest, that Charles Darwin line, and we use it in social and economic terms. But what he really meant in an ecological sense is, and this is again a Bill McDonough line, is survival of the fittingest. That is, the species that fit best into the niche, the ecological niche that it was in. Those are the species that fit. The better you're fit, the more you're likely going to survive. And so, when we talk about the native ecology, it's a system of relationships in the natural world in which life is constantly evolving. Change is the only constant, and constantly changing niches are made and filled, and new niches are made and filled, and it is the great gift of life, what life is. Revolution also means a fundamental paradigm shift. And I'm going to talk about 3 aspects of that paradigm shift. We're going to have a local food revolution. The first is our food system must live within current seller income. I've talked a little bit about that because of the price of oil. But we use oil extensively in our system. 40% of the petroleum we use in conventional agriculture is in inputs, not in transportation, not in fuel for tractors or food processing. It's in the making of inorganic fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. Think about that, 40%. That's a number from a study at the University of Michigan. So if we are really going to be on this little island, our West Michigan Strategic Alliance island, be self-sufficient, we have to end our dependence of our food system on oil. It means we are fundamentally insecure. And, I can tell you, and this is another whole long conversation, if there were farmers up here talking to what's happened to them, in the last 2 years, the price of corn went up to $5, $6 a bushel from $1.80 a bushel, and everybody was going to be a millionaire. The only thing they nobody really talked about is the price of fertilizer doubled, the price of herbicides doubled, the price of pesticides doubled, more than doubled. And so actually farmers were making less while grossing more. So, when oil's in the equation, we're basically out of control. We don't control our destiny. So we have to think about how we can end our food system's dependence on oil. The second element of the local food revolution, the revolution part of it, is our food system must be based on nature's prime directive, create diversity. When we have monocultures, we basically are violating, it's like trying to hold back the North Sea as the waters rise, right? We are fighting a force that we can never really win against. All we can do is just stop it temporarily. So when we do industrial agriculture, which is agriculture that treats nature as a resource that can be extracted and manipulated as opposed to worked with, we fundamentally are insecure and unsustainable. If we're going to have a local food system in our little island here, we're going to need to work with nature. We're going to need to figure out how we can take the natural resources that we have here and have a food system that does not require oil and that is built on diversity, because that's what makes the system strong, which makes it, it gives it resilience. And then we're going to have to think about, this fundamental idea of waste equals food. There's no such thing as waste in nature. Everything's food for something else. So we need to think about that consciously. So if we produced food waste in a school or a restaurant, it shouldn't go to a landfill. It should be composted and brought back. We should be thinking about the nutrient and energy cycles of our island, how we can use what we have and recycle it and work with nature's systems, energy and nutrient systems, to make it work for us again and again and again. Closed loop. So, could somebody bring me a cup of coffee or a glass of water, if you wouldn't mind? I've been losing my voice. This is a quote from E.F. Schumacher. And he's talking about, this is from Buddhist Economics and his book in 1973, Small is Beautiful, which many people think attribute their interest in back to the land and ecology to this book. It was one of those books that sort of started the movement. And we often, when I talk to people about this revolution that we need to do, people say, oh, you want to go back to the 19th century? Well, in some ways we do, but we're not in the 19th century. And we know a lot more, and we're connected, and we have information that connects us that people didn't have in the 19th century. So this is sort of E.F. Schumacher's answer to that. It's not stagnation. Is finding right livelihood. I like that line. I'm doing a film about E.F. Schumacher right now. And this is an amazing quote from Henry Wallace, who was Vice President of the United States in the third term of FDR. And it was written in 1941. 1941. What's really remarkable about this is the Wallace family owned Pioneer Seed, which is one of the preeminent seed companies in the world. And I'm not going to read it to you out loud, but basically, he's saying we need to think of ourselves as part of a community. We're part of nature. We don't have dominion over nature. We're not in charge. We are a big player. We're part of nature. And that if we work with nature as a member, as a participant in nature, that we can actually survive. He also said that he thought that the protection of soil fertility was as important to America's defense against Hitler's panzers as anything else, because soil fertility made it possible for us to feed our troops and feed the world. So it's about coming into harmony with nature. And since I'm talking about the economics of the local food revolution, it's coming into harmony with each other and with our human and financial resources. In this time, this last week, this incredible last 2 weeks of financial craziness, the thing that really strikes me, regardless of what you think happened, is how totally out of balance we are. That somehow we can fix it by borrowing from our grandchildren, and it's just, we've got to come into balance financially and spiritually and in balance with nature if we're going to survive on this island, our 8-county island. So what would this mean for West Michigan? This is an interesting question. What I'm about to go through is, I'm going to go through very quickly something that I could go through in much more detail. I just want to give you a flavor of what it would mean if we actually had a local food system in our 8-county area that fed 50% of our food needs. 75% of our food needs, whatever it is. Well, first thing, it would have to be organic. This is where a lot of people say, well, what do you mean? If we're going to be in harmony with nature, we have to respect the life in the soil, because everything comes from the life in the soil. This is the definition of organic agriculture from the Rodale Institute, which is one of the premier research institutes on organic agriculture. Organic agriculture builds life in the soil while avoiding the use of toxic chemicals that accumulate in soil, water, food, and people. And that accumulate in soil, water, food, and people is a whole conversation, because now the studies are coming out about what happens to us when we eat food and it's not grown with pesticides that have not been cleaned off, and how it enters our food system. A study was done 5 years ago of the umbilical cords of babies, and they found 21 organochlorine pesticides in the blood of the umbilical cords, which means it passed over the placenta into the baby. That's incredible. That means we're killing our children by using pesticides at some level. And and that's a whole this is not to say people use pesticides are bad. I'm just saying we have to be intentional if we're going to survive about coming into harmony with nature. And organic farming affects the environment in incredible ways and protects the Great Lakes. We have a lot of concern about runoff into the Great Lakes. When you farm organically and you build life in the soil and health in the soil, you retain the nutrients in the soil. You bind it up in a different way, and it doesn't run off as easily. So that means we don't have the algal blooms in the bays and in the lakes of Michigan. So that's it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about water quality. It's not coming up with some remedial system of tiles and ponds, and it's just doing what soil does best, which retains water when it's healthy and living. And here's the new hot deal in organic agriculture, is that when you grow food organically without pesticides and herbicides, not only do you avoid the oil use, but you also sequester almost double the amount of carbon that conventional agriculture. And in this era of global warming, and in this era of maybe carbon credits, organic farmers are going to have some interesting things to sell if they do that. So here's the equation. It's really not rocket science. Healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy food, healthy people. If the soil isn't healthy, the plants aren't healthy. And the plants aren't healthy, the food isn't healthy, and we're not healthy. It's just really, it's no big deal, except we don't do it. So, I want to start talking about the benefits of the local food revolution. Right now, chronic disease accounts for 83% of all healthcare costs. That's nationally. Now, we don't have some of these numbers broken down for Michigan, but I'm just using that 83% number as if it was true for Michigan. So in Michigan, the state government spent in 2003 $4.63 billion in chronic disease. That's a lot of money. You know, in the United States, in 2004, diabetes cost $92 billion. Diabetes is a chronic disease. In Michigan in 2004, it was $3.7 billion for all providers, public and private. Now that's an interesting number because in a time when Medicaid and state healthcare expenses are approaching 35-40% of the total general fund available to us, you know, if we can save money on healthcare, we have more money for schools. We have more money for roads. We have more money for conservation and preservation of the lakes. We have more money for everything. We are spending money on healthcare because we don't eat right. And here's the deal. If that $3.7 billion in diabetes in Michigan in 2004 that we spent, public and private providers, we could have saved $3 billion of that if people had just eaten a better diet. $3 billion. That's one disease in 1 year, right? It would be cheaper to give people healthy local food than insulin. We talk about, well, poor people who are overweight, they have access to the bad food and they have high incidence of obesity and diabetes. Instead of having them come into the emergency rooms of our hospitals and seeking emergency care, very expensive, which we pay for with our public dollars, we should just give them healthy food and help them eat that. It would be cheaper by a factor of 10. And if it was local food, it would be food that would help our farmers thrive. It's just common sense. Yet we have I'll probably get in trouble for this, but we have an economic growth strategy in this state, which is get sicker and we'll grow. Because the fastest growing sector of our economy is what? Healthcare. That's not a sustainable economic growth strategy. There is in Grand Rapids, Spectrum Health has a program called Nutritional Options for Wellness, called NOW. And since 2003, they've been doing exactly that. They've been taking people with chronic disease that they treat in their clinics and connecting them to 11 local food banks, all associated with churches, who agree to allow the people in the program come to their food banks once a week instead of once a month, typically, which is what the limit is for most food banks. And they've had they've cut like drug use by 75% in some diseases. They've saved so much money by doing this. And they've had about 400, 500 people now go through this program. They just won an award, American Hospital Association, for this program. It's a fundamentally different way of approaching health. And it's right here in Grand Rapids. Very few people know about it. And it's not being replicated in other hospitals. Auto industry, which is, you know, our sick grandfather who takes care of us. Healthcare costs per car are around $1,200. If you take 83% of that as chronic disease, and let's just say we could prevent half of that by good food. 50% of that. That would be $500 off the cost of a car that could go into the pockets of the workers and the stockholders and the managers of that company instead of going out because we eat badly. This is an economic development strategy. Local food production, when we eat healthily, can make us more competitive. And in fact, Access Health in Muskegon has a program for small employers where they get lower rates if the people take classes on good nutrition and costs for their employees. So, now let's talk about educational performance. You know, this is a concern that is an extraordinary concern because we have very sick children in our schools. We have very high obesity and diabetes rates in Muskegon County where I live. And we can do something about that. There was an experiment done in Appleton, Wisconsin at the Alternative Charter High School where they fed them good food. And I won't go into all the details of this. You can go online if you search Appleton, and you'll see, they had an extraordinary change. Vandalism, drugs, weapons, violations, dropout, expulsion rates, suicide attempts just disappeared. And this is the alternative high school, so these are the troubled kids, right? These are the kids that don't fit in. It went, here's another number which I like. Attendance before the program, if they were lucky, was around 75, 77%, so it was almost perfect attendance after the program started. Food can affect, and if you talk to any teacher about the difference between teaching the kids in the morning and teaching the kids after they've eaten lunch, we hear these stories all the time about how crazy the kids get because of the diet that they are eating. Now, this is not a conspiracy. It's just neglect. We have not prioritized this. Local food could do a lot to improve student health and performance. Now, let's talk about economic development. This is a quote. How much time do I have? Oh, okay. Well, give me 10. We can cut off the back of the documentary. The most valuable natural resource of the 21st century is brains. This is a quote from the publisher of Forbes. So if smart people are our future, what do they look for when they come to a community? Tax breaks are not it. Everybody gives them tax breaks. They look for schools, look for quality of life. Local food is part of that. And the community around local food is part of that. If we wanted to brand ourselves in West Michigan as the place to locate your company, if we had an intentional local food system here that, was focused on our children first, so we had the best quality meals in our schools, we would have such an advantage in the economic competition, you wouldn't believe it. So I'm going to go through this quickly. This is what I just said. What if we were known for this? Well, what we're doing in Muskegon County is we're actually doing this. We're doing a farm-to-school project, and I think, politically, parents and teachers and others are really concerned about children's nutrition. So it's the doorway to begin to have this local food conversation. What we're going to do is, in Muskegon County, over just about 2 million meals are served annually, 14 million food purchases. Almost no local food is purchased for that. None of our farmers get that money, right? And there are many obstacles to changing this system. And you can see we don't have enough farmers growing for local food. We don't have preparation and storage. We have the children who are targets of a advertising culture that teaches them to eat badly. And we have public policy that doesn't support feeding kids local food. So what we're going to do is a business plan to how we can feed our children 100% local organic food year-round. And we're going to go through, and a business plan is different from a report. It puts numbers. You're in business, you know what it is. We're going to look at the alternatives and what the numbers are and what it costs. Because we really think that once we do that, and we're going to do it transparently, we're going to do it on a website, which will be up October 1st, www.healthyschoolmeals.org. And it's going to be open to everybody in the community to follow. Everything we do is going to be posted on there. So it's going to be a community ongoing conversation. Farm to School offers us a great opportunity because not only does it make our schools more attractive and our kids more successful and healthier, and it helps our local farmers, but it provides that sort of paradigm shift in our thinking that can be applied to everything else, whether it's energy, solid waste disposal, you name it. So I want to end with just two very quick stories, and then we're done. So people say, what about the cities? In 1993, the Soviet Union fell apart, and the command and control food system that fed the people of the Soviet Union fell apart with it. And the people in the cities of what is now the Russian Federation were facing hunger and maybe even starvation. We didn't do anything to help them. But the European Union did, and they flew plane loads of food into these cities and averted the disaster. But many of those planes were Lufthansa planes. And 48 years after the end of the Second World War, for the Russians, a very proud people, to see the Germans feeding them was a humiliating experience. Fast forward 10 years, 2003. In 2003, and I've actually got numbers for 2006 as well, but 2003, 98% of the vegetables grown in the Russian Federation that were consumed in homes were grown in garden plots in small urban farms. 30 million Russian households had one of those. It was 6% of the land. We can grow food in our cities. It's been done many times. It's going on right now in Detroit. The greening of Detroit there's over 300 urban gardens and 26 different urban agriculture sites, including a 2.5-acre farm right next to the Eastern Market. We can do that. We can grow our own food here. We could be self-sufficient. Cities do not have to be food deserts. We could actually grow food, and there's a bunch of benefits to that, which I could talk about, but we're out of time. So the second story, and this is the story that I think is the most hopeful thing I've heard. In Montague, Michigan, which is one of the public school systems in Muskegon County, Kyle Fiebig, who's the FFA director, agri-science teacher, this year is going to grow 13,000 pounds of lettuce using his students in greenhouses and hoop houses and provide all the lettuce for Montague High School and Middle School with his students in the school system, saving the school system lots of money. And he's already done a test last spring. The kids went crazy. It was like their football team won the state championship. It was their lettuce. So there are a lot of strategies here if we begin to have this conversation. And it's already beginning to happen. So anyway, that's my contact information. And I think I'm done. Almost 5 minutes. Sure, exactly. So I'm an organizer. And the people, it's very easy for me to talk to people who agree with me. We all do it, right? It's a very pleasurable experience. So I began to look around and say, who were the people that really needed to know about what I just talked about? And it turns out it is local economic development folks, chambers of commerce, county and township governments, people who really have a lot of responsibility and don't have a lot of information about this. So I used to live in Iowa, and I was director of a large campaign on sustainable agriculture there. And one of the things we did is we helped Woodbury County get started doing a local food revolution around a farmer's market. And they've taken it much further since I left. So I made this film about Woodbury County, Iowa, the first county in the United States to make local organic food their economic development strategy.